unless you've been on a distant planet, the United States, we've seen campus protests turn into riots, turn into fights with police throughout the state, throughout the nation, in virtually every state. I mean, it's just absolutely remarkable. And California has probably been among the worst. California, New York. And in California, we've seen a variety of responses to this. We've seen, all of this begins with ostensibly the October 7th attack by a terror group in Israel called Hamas, which launches this invasion, this attack on Israelis. And before the dust is even settled on October 7th, you've got protest movements forming on college campuses declaring that this was a good thing, that Palestinians are finally rising up and we have to support them. So that over the course of months has turned into protests, permanent encampments where students and others set up tents on campus and occupy whole public spaces, assaults on Jewish and other students who just want to continue to go to class. So the protest movement is metastasized throughout California. The response of school administrators has been widely varied. I think one of the early, I would argue, intelligent responses was at Pomona College here in Southern California, where the president just basically told people, clear out of the building, I'm calling the police, and if you're not done, if you're not out of here by then, you're being arrested. And then she followed through, and the police showed up and arrested students who had occupied not just her office, but an entire school building. On the other hand, you had administrators who tried to negotiate with student leaders, and that seems to have made the protests only worse. So at UCLA, that's University of California, Los Angeles, and USC in particular, you've seen real fights break out. UCLA was among the most terrifying because it was student-on-student violence with no police anywhere in sight. USC's was campus security ultimately backed by police, trying to clear out a public area on the campus there and getting into fights with students there. I think, what's important about these demonstrations is that it has an effect on people way outside the school system, particularly where the state schools are involved. I'm talking about the University of California system, the Cal State system, where taxpayer dollars have built up these institutions over 100 years in some cases. And now these institutions are being torn down. So taxpayers pay for the system, we continue to fund it, and while the student protesters are saying, we don't want our tuition dollars to go to fund Israel, I think a lot of taxpayers would reasonably say to themselves, I don't want my tax dollars funding an institution that encourages kind of vile and violent behavior, whether it's anti-Semitism or damage to university property. I don't want to be funding that. So I think, part of the curiosity of a lot of Californians might be, where does this come from? How did this problem occur, and why do the administrators let it get so far out of hand? To understand that problem, I think you can't just start with what's being taught at the universities, although I do think that's important. So just as an example of that, let's start there. What is being taught at the universities? At USC, a lot of the demonstrations, a lot of the protests started after the university's hand-selected valedictorian was barred from giving her speech, a speech which the university ought to have known would be anti-Semitic in the extreme, very pro-Palestinian, very pro-Hamas, and probably antithetical to the values, I hope, of the University of Southern California. So how did this valedictorian come to be chosen? It's not simply by grade point average. 200 USC students met the minimum requirement to be considered for the valedictory speech. 100 of them applied, but a hand-selected group of university professors selected this young woman whose her major was in, I think, biomedical engineering, which sounds awesome and terrific. We need people like this. But her minor degree was in something called Resistance to Genocide Studies. So this is an academic enterprise which is avowedly anti-Israel, anti-U.S. It argues that the U.S. is the greatest threat to democracy worldwide. This is a really dangerous and pernicious philosophy being promulgated at one of the nation's most important private universities. So, in other words, the university ought to have known this long before, that this would be a problem for them long before they selected this young woman to be their valedictory speaker, and then decided to rescind that invitation. So it doesn't just start, however, at the university level. It begins far before that, down to the level of K-12 education. Our public school system in California just really emphasizes a kind of identity politics. And it does this through funding mechanisms, it does this through celebrations of specific events and the declaration that others are terrible. But we have a real identity politics philosophy impregnated now in K-12 curricula that involves things like gender equity and gender fluidity all the way to race and ethnicity. So it's a pretty radical sort of curriculum that is taught in our grade schools and all the way through our high schools. So it's hardly a surprise that when students get to college that they express the kinds of opinions and attitudes that they've learned over the course of 12 years of education in California. I'll give you an example. The head of the United Teachers Los Angeles, that's a teachers union organization. It's the second largest teachers union in America. It is the largest teachers union in California. UTLA is. Their president famously recently said that it was okay that her students, she acknowledged that the students in Los Angeles are not performing well. In fact, they're performing terribly on academic standards tests, among the worst in the nation. But she turned the question around on her interviewer by saying, but math isn't what really matters. She said something like, our students may not understand their multiplication tables, but they know riot and insurrection. They know politics, in other words. So this is what our students are being taught, that it's okay if you don't know math. It's okay if you can't read or write at grade level, as long as you understand how to engage powerfully and effectively in protest. That's become what we're teaching our children now. So I really blame the adults. I would, when I talk to people who say, can you believe how stupid these kids are? I think these kids are acting perfectly consistently with the things that we have taught them. We showed them during the COVID pandemic that we really don't care about their education. We shut down their schools, even though children were the least likely to get sick, transmit, or die from COVID. The least likely, like 0.0% of all COVID deaths were children under the age of 18. They just weren't getting it, but we shut down the schools anyway. Why? Because our teachers' unions wanted them shut down. We went along with that. So we have showed these children, I think, that we don't really care overly much about their education, or that we only want them to be educated in forms of protest and radical thinking. And so they're acting consistently with that. I blame us. I blame we, the adults who voted for these kinds of policies, who accepted them, or who looked the other way. I admit that in my own case, there were whole periods of time when I wasn't paying close attention to my children's education. Yes, I'm saying that out loud. There were days and nights and even a week, would go by sometimes when I was simply too busy with my own work and my own life to really pay attention to what the kids were learning. And I think most Californians would admit that. If they really searched their own hearts, they would find, you know what, many of us weren't paying attention. We let this generation down. So I think that, as they say in some 12-step programs, the first step is admitting you've got a problem. We have a problem. We have a problem, and that is, as I've suggested, that we adults have allowed a radical ideology to permeate our classrooms, all the way down to the names of the schools we bring our children into during the day, to identifying some holidays as the holidays of people who hated America rather than the people who helped build America in California. But it is an ideology that permeates everything and excuses academic failure. That's our biggest problem. George W. Bush famously said that this is the soft bigotry of low expectations, that we allow our children to fail academically so long as they really learn the philosophy of violence and violent revolution. So the first step is admitting we have a problem. The second step is really paying attention to your local school district and really getting involved there. I'll give you an example. We have, my organization, the California Policy Center, has pushed for what we call parent notification. That means that anything that your kid does on campus, if it's noteworthy enough to result in a change in the child's permanent files, that the parents need to be notified. This would include changing their pronouns or getting into fights or wanting to use a locker room that's not theirs, boys going into the girls' locker rooms, that sort of thing. Things that would seem not terribly extraordinary and very normal, let the parents know. Well, not only would the state assembly not hear this as a bill, they repudiated it, said that this would unleash violence of parents against their own children. So we went to the local school board level, and now about 15 or so school boards have adopted this policy. And the state's response has been to sue these school districts, to sue them for implementing this policy. So I would ask for parents to be really attentive at the local school district level to where the teachers union is going, because most teachers unions in California are all in favor of this radical ideology that teaches we can go soft on math and science and go heavy on the political ideology. And they're going to fight parents. They're going to fight parent notification. They're going to fight any effort to improve academic achievement. They're going to fight this, the teachers union is. That is the enemy. The leaders of teachers unions are the problem in this. And I would argue that parents at the local level, Democrats or Republicans, anytime the teachers union endorses something, really investigate that. There's an old saying, I'm a trained journalist, there's an old saying in journalism, if your mother tells you she loves you, check it out, right? Be skeptical. Be really, really persistent and inquiring. So if your local teachers union is endorsing something, check it out. If your kids come home with crazy ideas, meet with the teacher, talk to the principal, find out where this comes from. And by all means, really insist on academic achievement for all kids, regardless of race or class. What we really want is the highest level of academic achievement in California. What we have right now is the worst. We spend more per student in California than any other state in the union, and we get among the worst results in the nation. That cannot be allowed to go on. Demand rigor in education.
If you haven't checked out CaliforniaInsider.com, we highly recommend you do that now, because we're going to have a lot of news and videos there. And on top of what we have there right now, we are building a really big platform to cover what's happening in California, so you can be informed. We're going to have more shows, more videos from all aspects of life in California. Go to CaliforniaInsider.com and we'll see you there.